Hi, this is Deena Thomson, author of Fallen Poppies, and this is chapter 19. This is chapter 20.
Chapter 19. Much to JoBeth's joy, she finally gave birth to a son. They named him Alan Michael, after both Alan and JoBeth's father. With the birth of her boy, JoBeth felt a sense of peace she had not had since the death of her firstborn. Oliver and Shauna kept in constant touch. 10 months after they were married, their first child, Daniel, was born. He was nearly 2 years old, and JoBeth could hardly wait to see him. Her little Shauna was a mother. She had received miniature portraits of Daniel, but craved seeing the child in person. Shauna and Oliver were going to pay them a visit for the first time since their marriage, with special news for Alan and JoBeth. The day Shauna and Oliver were to arrive, JoBeth was busy in the kitchen cooking a special dinner that Shauna loved. "Mama!" Joanna stormed through the kitchen as angry as could be. "You better teach that girl some manners!" Annoyed, JoBeth turned to her daughter. Joanna looked so much like her, tall and lean. "What girl?" JoBeth asked, disturbed. Shauna and Oliver would be there any moment. She didn't need to have another confrontation with this child. "Mara Joy is behind the barn with that Frank Perkins boy." Her face was all screwed up in rage. All the children were outside playing in the hot summer sun. "What?" JoBeth yelled, glaring at her child. Quickly, she poured a pot of water from the pump in the kitchen. "Stay in here and keep an eye on the babies. They are going to wake up soon," JoBeth ordered, not looking at Joanna as she reached the front door. As she ran, the bucket slopped water over its rim, splashing JoBeth's skirt. Joanna stood still, unable to move as she watched her mother leave, trailing water behind her. She reached the barn in no time and could hear giggling, both male and female. Horrible thoughts coursed through her mind about what could be happening behind the barn door. JoBeth quickened her steps in the direction of the giggles. She was just about to throw the bucket of water over the two children when she saw what was happening. Mara Joy and the neighbor boy, Frank, were making dandelion jewelry, putting flower bracelets on each other's arms and heads. Spotting her mother, the child stood up, giving her one of her winning smiles. "Hi, Mama," she tittered, her dark curls cascading into her crystal blue eyes. She absently brushed a tendril out of them. "What is wrong?" she asked innocently, looking at JoBeth with her sweetest smile. "Am I not allowed to have a boyfriend over?" "Your boyfriend?" It was as though Mara Joy could read JoBeth's mind and knew what she intended to do with the bucket of water. "Yes, I am 10 now. I think I am old enough to have one. What do you think?" The child spoke while trying to put a bracelet of flowers around her wrist. "Well, I don't think Pappy would agree with you, young lady." JoBeth looked at the beautiful young girl. The older she got, the more exquisite she became. Her long black hair tumbled in loose curls down her back, and her striking blue eyes seemed to pierce through anyone she looked at. You could not help but stare at the striking child. "Why don't you ask Frank for dinner tonight? He can meet your Uncle Oliver and Shauna." "Don't forget Daniel, Mama," Mara Joy squealed, clutching her hands to her flat chest. "Never," JoBeth laughed and felt foolish. How could she have thought her precious Mara Joy could be up to anything wrong? "Mama?" "Yes, my dearest," JoBeth answered, getting ready to leave. Mara Joy stood beside the handsome red-headed boy. "Why do you have that pot?" Mara Joy seemed confused, her dark brows weaving together. "No reason. Go back to playing with Frank." JoBeth turned away, embarrassed. The girl shrugged her shoulders and pulled Frank by the arm back to their dandelions. "Why did you lie like that to get your sister in trouble?" JoBeth yelled furiously as she entered the house. Joanna jumped from where she stood, stirring food over the stove. Pauline was beside her, watching her big sister. She too jumped, startled by her mother's outburst. Instantly, she began to whimper. Alan Michael began to stir on the couch where he had been sleeping. "I wasn't lying," Joanna pouted, forcing herself not to cry. "She was in the back." Joanna stalled. Her mother would never believe her now. Mara Joy had the upper hand once again. The girl sighed dejectedly. "She was doing things she was not supposed to be doing. You told her to watch Constance, and she was not doing that." "Joanna," Jo Beth shook her head and went to her crying girls. "Why you make such a big deal of things, I will never know. Girls, I am sorry that I got so mad." Jo Beth bent down and hugged them close to her. She was so jumpy lately. "Where is Constance?" she asked. "She went to meet Pappy halfway," Joanna sniffed, going to the counter to get cookies. "Joanna, we are going to be eating soon. Get out of those," Jo Beth said through clenched teeth. She sat down heavily on the kitchen chair and rubbed her throbbing temples. She felt wasted. She was 28 and felt 50. "Joanna, take Pauline and Alan Michael to meet your father, please," she said, holding her head in the palm of her hands. "Sure, Mama." Joanna obeyed, taking Pauline's hand and heading for their brother. Alan Michael sat miserably on the couch, half asleep. He didn't want to go meet his father. At 2 years old, he didn't like many things. Joanna forced him out the door, dragging him by the arm, whining. She wasn't about to upset her mother any further. Chapter 20. "What is wrong, Jo Beth?" Alan asked as he walked into the kitchen. Jo Beth had just begun to finish up the last-minute chores before Oliver and Shauna arrived. She turned to him questioningly. "The children say you are crabby." He was carrying Joanna in his arms. He placed her down gently, looking to Jo Beth for answers. Jo Beth thought Joanna was too old to be carried in her father's arms. She was 9 years old and quite tall for her age. She looked ridiculous, clinging to Alan's neck, her long, gangly legs dangling awkwardly around his waist. "Nothing." Jo Beth turned away from him and continued to clean the counter. "I'm just edgy." She attacked the counter with a vengeance. Alan frowned at her and looked at Joanna, who pouted on the kitchen chair. "I made Mama mad at me," she whimpered. Jo Beth swung around, glaring at her daughter. She closed her eyes tightly. The girl had a habit of making mountains out of molehills. "Your mother is not mad at you, Joanna," Alan soothed as he bent down to her level, his hands resting on her bony knees. He scowled at Jo Beth with an angry red face. In a demanding voice, he asked, "Right, Jo Beth?" "No, I'm not mad at her." She looked away from them both. Her headache had once again returned, and now she was angry that Alan was taking the child's side. Couldn't he see Joanna was playing on his good nature? "Go outside and play," Jo Beth said in a cool voice, her back still to them. Joanna stared at her mother straight back and felt empty. She got up and gathered the children around her. She looked at her father pleadingly as she led Alan Michael, Constance, and Pauline outside. "I wish you would not take your frustrations out on the children," Alan said in a furious voice. Jo Beth turned to him, shocked. She couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. "Joanna plays you against me," Jo Beth retaliated, throwing down the rag she was using. "She just wants your attention, Jo Beth. You are always so harsh on her. You make her feel like she can never do anything right." His face reddened. He saw how Jo Beth acted with the children. She played favorites with Mara Joy and Alan Michael and doted on their every move, as the other 3 girls, especially Joanna, sat in the background, starving for their mother's attention. That is not true." Jo Beth struggled to fight back the tears. She hated it when Alan was irate with her. He never was unless it had to do with the children. She was about to protest more when Oliver burst through the door. "Oliver!" Alan said, turning abruptly into the other man's broad embrace. The men slapped each other on the back affectionately. JoBeth bounced around excitedly, looking for Shauna. She spotted her coming through the door, a baby cradled in her arms. "Shauna!" JoBeth squealed, scrambling past the two loud men. She hugged the young woman tightly to her, nearly squishing the baby between them. "This can't be Daniel," JoBeth said, gazing into the blanket. Shauna laughed wickedly. No, she said warmly. "This is Donna. Daniel is coming out of the automobile, or trying to get out of that contraption, whatever way you want to look at it." JoBeth's breath caught in her throat as Shauna revealed the sleeping bundle in her arms. With trembling hands, she carefully took the newborn from Shauna, marveling at the tiny fingers and rosebud lips. "You never said anything in your letters," JoBeth gasped, her eyes welling with tears. "I wanted to surprise you," the other woman beamed, her heart swelling with pride. "It nearly killed me not to tell you." JoBeth stared at Shauna, amazed that after all this time, she still couldn't grasp how the little haunted waif of so long ago had grown up right before her eyes. Mara Joy opened the front door to find Oliver standing at the threshold, arms open wide and smiling. As soon as he saw her, he swept her up in a tight embrace and spun her around, her feet barely touching the ground. She was laughing and squealing, her small body engulfed in his large arms. "Uncle Oliver, put me down," she squeaked. "I'm too big for this." Oliver laughed again, resting his forehead against hers. "I have missed you, my darling. I didn't think it was possible, but you have become more beautiful since I last saw you." He placed her beside the rest of the children, waiting to be tossed in the air. Mommy, where are you?" A small voice came from the doorway. The room erupted into chaos as the small blond boy with pale blue-gray eyes walked in. "Daniel!" everyone said in unison, running towards him with open arms. JoBeth felt a warm liquid feeling spreading inside her as she watched fondly as Shauna embraced her small son. It felt so good to see her. She had missed her deeply. She lowered her gaze and looked down at the baby squirming in her arms. In relief, she exhaled. The family was reunited once again. After dinner, and when all the children had been put down to bed, the four adults collapsed in the living room, exhausted. With JoBeth and Alan's 5 children and Shauna and Oliver's 2, the homestead had turned into a zoo. It took everything out of the parents to calm their excited brood down. They were still fidgeting and giggling as JoBeth and Shauna tucked the crowded children into their shared sleeping spaces. Oliver smiled and cleared his throat, setting his cup of tea down on the table. JoBeth bustled around the room, ensuring everyone had plenty to eat and drink before settling down in her armchair beside the fireplace. Shauna leaned into Oliver, her face glowing with anticipation, and he reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "We have some fantastic news to share with you both," he said. "I thought we already had the good news. Your daughter, Donna," JoBeth replied as Alan sat beside her. Early in the evening, she apologized to him for her behavior with the children. They made up with a small peck on the lips and a hug. It would have to do for now. "Yes, but we have more," Oliver said, mysteriously. JoBeth and Alan looked confused. What more could there be? "Well, don't keep us in suspense any longer," Alan said, holding on to JoBeth's hand. His heart was beginning to pound. He couldn't explain the odd way he was suddenly feeling. "In 2 days, we are going to have our first family reunion," Oliver said, nodding his head. Shauna covered her mouth to suppress her urge to squeal. "What?" Alan sat up straight. We don't have any other relatives." "Yes, that is true," Oliver said, leaning in closer. "But aren't there 3 guys you two have not seen in about, 14 years?" He sat back in his seat, studying the bewildered faces of the 2 in front of him. Alan looked at Jo Beth, his face confused. She gazed deep into his green eyes that she loved so much. She could feel his raw emotions as though they were her own. "I think Oliver is trying to tell us that the boys have been found." She spoke softly at her husband's stunned face. He clutched her arm, unable to believe his ears. His face contorted with emotion. A tear began to roll down his cheek. "Jo Beth?" he asked in a shaky voice. She smiled at him and pulled him to her. "Can it be true?" he whispered. She looked at the other couple in disbelief, searching for an answer. "It's true," Oliver said, staring at the floor, his emotions flooding over him. "Our brothers are alive and coming home." Jo Beth heard a sob fall out of her mouth. "A miracle," she muttered. "They will be here in 2 days with their new families," Shauna said in her sweet, soft voice. Jo Beth and Alan sat back in their seats in disbelief. After all the years of wondering what had happened to them, the old gang would be together again. Jo Beth looked down at her feet, where old Queenie was curled up asleep. She was an ancient dog now, who had seen it all. Jonah, Tamara. A tear trickled down her cheek. She wiped it away absent-mindedly. Not all the family would be there. Queenie looked up at Jo Beth with her foggy dark eyes and gray muzzle and whined. "I know, girl. I know," Jo Beth cooed, scratching the silky flap of the dog's ear.